Got absolutely rugged yesterday in an NFL DFS. Got dunked on Twitter by my good friend, Patrick Laird.
It was definitely a tough week, but I think what everyone wants to know, Davis, is that on Sundays where you do kind of feel lost, it happens a couple times a year for all of us, no doubt. Like, how do you approach that? Is that one of those situations where you just lean a little bit more into the projections? Do you try and, have a little bit more feel when you know everyone's struggling, right? So how would you approach it?
That's what I did. Because it feels easier, right? Like you open up the slate. There wasn't, I believe there was no game total in the 50s. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And some of the teams with the higher team totals of the slate, they were all teams that like to run the ball, which is that's maybe good for like seasonal fantasy or whatever, but it's pretty bad for daily fantasy. I mean, Tampa Bay, Indianapolis was one of the more appealing games, but that kind of, because of other stuff we've talked about, that one was kind of like off the board for me because we just expected so much ownership on Godwin, so much ownership on Evans, on Pittman, and that's totally what happened. Those guys were uber chalk. And the game that I decided on as being the game I was going to attack was Minnesota San Francisco, but I did it in like the nut worst way. I played Ayuk, who I think he got 18 or whatever, which is fine. But I played Justin Jefferson over Adam Thielen. J. Jeff has his classic no touchdown game where he looks like the most efficient wide receiver on earth. And the specific stuff is not really important, but I just had no read. Like, it's just sometimes you sit down and you're like, I have no read on what is actually a good strategy this week. And so what I did is I did end up leaning pretty hard in the projections and playing guys who I absolutely hate. Evan Ingram, Jamison Crowder. It's like, what am I doing playing these super low ceiling, they have to just get insane usage to get there type guys. And it was just brutal, dude. It was just so bad.
Yeah, I ended up playing Jimmy G stack as well. I ended up playing Darrell Henderson for that late swap equity with Dylan, which in theory was solid, but I just had all the wrong pieces, but I honestly got some of it right. So basically I ended up playing Jimmy G with Ayuk, with Kittle, brought it back with Dalvin Cook. Obviously Dalvin Cook gets injured, or maybe I cashed this team, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Did a little mini stack with Javonte and Mike Williams, whether I thought was going to be much lower owned than it ended up being in kind of the mid to higher stakes stuff, smaller field stuff. So right off the bat, I knew that my mini stack that was way too high owned was not a good start. Ended up playing the Bengals defense, which was fine, obviously. But the whole reason I didn't play Debo on this team was, in theory, if he's going to get all of this rushing work, I thought it was going to take away from Jimmy G. That actually happened. That played out. I guess picked the wrong side of it. And then the Cooper Kupp stuff, I personally wanted to try and get up to Christian McCaffrey, but when that opened up the possibility of getting Dylan in that game and maybe a contrarian mini stack, a Cooper Kupp at 10% was nice, but he was never originally a part of my plan for this team. So very close. I think the cash game stuff was tougher though, Davis. Like we were considering guys like Miles Sanders. We were considering all these quarterbacks that normally wouldn't be in play.
Playing Miles Sanders because the projections liked him is like, it's just so mentally weak because, and it's so easy to say these things in hindsight, but he's never getting the passing down work. And even with Jordan Howard out, they're not going to put the Boston Scott cat or back in the cage or whatever, the genie back in the bottle. That's not happening. And I mean, we've seen this happen both ways where Hurts loses all the goal line touchdowns to the running backs, but you also know it's certainly not like playing, a Tom Brady goal line running back or a Carson Wentz goal line running back where those guys are getting the rushing touchdown 90% of the time. Like they're on the 3-yard line and you're like, well, this is 50-50 to go to my guy or go to the quarterback. And like, it just was so thin. And this is, again, very hindsight, but it feels so stupid to have played Miles Sanders instead of Eli Mitchell, given the respective spots. Like just at least I didn't play Miles Sanders in any tournaments. Like at least I was smart enough to know that was bad.
I don't know, man. That's bad, but also falling into like the cool kid GPP plays at 20%, also bad. I think that like I don't really get too far into like what the optimal stuff is, the cash game stuff, because I don't really play that stuff. What I get upset about is very obvious missed opportunities for leverage. So literally, I ran the Sims on Sunday morning, like on the live stream, and just completely ignored Cordero Patterson being like the second highest frequency on the slate at a very low ownership in that range when everyone was trying to get to other running backs in that tier. Completely ignored that. So that's frustrating. But also, like, I've played Lenny a few times this year with Tom Brady, without Tom Brady, but like I just didn't even think about all the ownership is going to Chris Godwin. All the ownership is going to Rob Gronkowski, Tom Brady. I never even considered that Leonard Fournette could come in there and just offer a ton of leverage on the slate. And that's basically what happened. And I never even considered either of those things. That's where I get frustrated.
Yeah, and Lenny was in the shell that I made for myself like last Monday or whatever, probably right after we got off the show.
Nice.
And ended up playing Saquon over him in my main single entry team, which again just is like, obviously this is bad. Like why? Yeah. I don't know. I just like I played bad. I didn't feel good going in. Like retroactively looking at my results, I'm like it was just bad, and it's hard to kind of learn a lesson from that. Like it's like 2 weeks in a row where I feel like I played pretty bad. I don't know.
There was some
maybe
injuries
the
in
answer
there
is
too, though. So it's like really hard to even like go back and look at that slate when like some of those plays, like you've no idea what CMC would have got. You have no idea if Dalvin would have broke one late, like stuff like that. Like a lot of the really thin plays didn't really get there. I just like am a little bit upset with myself on some ownership stuff. Like I had no business playing this Jimmy G stack in tournaments. No business.
I think that's probably a more helpful way to, like, if you're trying to gain something from your process in a week where you weren't even close, is just like, how did I do in terms of ownership relative to the leverage that those plays provided and their theoretical upside? And like, I felt pretty good about the percentages that I got on guys like Eli Mitchell really low. The Kirk Cousins double stacks were like the lower owned side of that game, which I felt good about. So like, I guess that's good. And that's really all that you have left to evaluate is ownership stuff. Like, did I make any horrendous ownership errors? Like one of the things I did was played the Jets defense because I knew the Texans were going to be the super chalk. The Jets defense should have offered leverage on that. And I think it was like a coin flip between those two defenses. So like that is something helpful. And just like trying to learn about what the field is doing in weeks where you basically just whiff.
Yeah, there's one more thing I want to ask you about on this topic. But before that, the last thing that I was kind of thinking about is like, as you go through, like you find these games that you like, but also like I fall into like a stack that kind of worked the week before. I mean, obviously worked the week before with Green Bay and Minnesota. I was a little bit more susceptible for these narratives about how everyone's talking about how condensed Minnesota's offense is now. So I was playing that stack all week. Like I'd basically made up my mind because Jimmy G on FanDuel was like 6,500. He was basically free. So I think I got a little bit anchored, and normally I'm pretty good at not getting really too like set earlier in the week, but this is the quickest I was ever done before lock. So that was kind of rough. But what I wanted to ask you about in these weeks that you do feel a little bit uncomfortable, do you ever consider scaling back? I always kind of am on the side of, if you're fluctuating your action week in, week out, like we don't really know where we're going to go a lot of times anyways. But if you're playing cash games and that sort of stuff, like maybe there should have been a scale back opportunity here, but I never really know what to do with that. I never really do it personally. So I was curious if you do.
Yeah, I did scale back this week. Normally I'm sitting there at like 10:30 or 11 Central Time, like looking to see like, okay, is there another red zone that's open? Is there a spy with like a good payout that's still open? And this week I didn't at all. I think I only played 4 tournament entries, like four lineups in a sort of different contest, and that's like half of what I would normally do, just because I literally could like not even think of teams. Like normally I'll like have ideas like, oh yeah, no, this would be cool to do a Wentz double stack with like Gronk as the bring back or something. And I just was bereft of ideas yesterday.
All right. I want everyone to let me know in the comments what their biggest regret was from this past week. I have plenty of them. I know Davis does as well.